Welcome to World Talk Brief.
So here's what we have on tap today. We're going to start with a quick look at the kinds of headlines that are flooding our screens right now. Then we'll peel back the curtain and break down the mechanics of why those headlines work so well. And finally, we'll use that new toolkit to look at a pretty high-stakes global story in a completely new way. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's just dive right into the daily news cycle. You know how it is. Any given day, your feed is just this wild mix of stories. We're talking big business, intense politics, and yeah, a lot of celebrity drama. They're all fighting for your eyeballs, but what's actually cutting through all that noise?
Well, first up, we've got a story from the world of AI and finance. The company is AppLovin, and their stock just tanked. It plummeted 15% in just a few days. So what caused such a dramatic drop? Well, a really damning report from a short seller. And we're not talking about small accusations here. An investment firm called Capital Watch dropped an absolute bombshell, claiming AppLovin was enabling money laundering and had ties to criminal networks in Asia. That is a textbook, high-stakes headline designed to make a massive impact.
All right, let's switch gears to politics. Over at the World Economic Forum in Davos, former President Donald Trump made a pretty huge claim that he personally stopped a war between India and Pakistan. It's a really powerful political statement, crafted to project this image of being a decisive leader on the world stage.
And then you get these other kind of weird, mysterious headlines. Like this one from Brew Markets that just says red, white, and green. That's it. It's short, it's intriguing, and it immediately makes you wonder, what is that about? You feel like you have to click to find out. Turns out it was about Italian stocks. A super simple trick, but it's really effective at sparking our curiosity.
And of course, no news day is complete without some celebrity gossip. I mean, come on. This headline from Perez Hilton is a total masterclass in grabbing your attention. You've got a huge celebrity, you've got conflict, you've got super high emotions, and a promise of secret info. It almost feels like it was scientifically engineered to make you click. And, well, in a way it was. So, how exactly does that work?
And that's the perfect lead-in to our next section, the why. We've seen the headlines, but now let's get into the science behind them. Because it turns out there's a fascinating psychology behind what makes us click, and a lot of it comes down to just how our brains are wired.
Now, this framework here, it might look a little academic. I get it. It's from a research paper. But the core idea is actually super simple and incredibly powerful. Emotion. Emotion is the critical switch for grabbing our attention. From a psychological standpoint, it helps us remember things. It even shapes our behavior. Think of it like the engine that drives our engagement. And this is the exact toolkit we're going to use to deconstruct those headlines we just saw. One of the key techniques for flipping that emotional switch is something called forward reference. And I promise you have seen this a million times. It's headlines like, "This is why," or "The one thing you should never do." These phrases are deliberately designed to create an information gap. They leave you hanging. And our brains absolutely hate that feeling of not knowing. So we get curious, we feel that little pull, and we just have to click to get the answer. Another really powerful tool is called framing. You can present the exact same information in two completely different ways. A gain frame focuses on the positive side of things, right? Taking this measure can improve health. It makes you feel hopeful. But the loss frame, that one's often way more effective. By highlighting what you stand to lose, if no action is taken, health will deteriorate. It taps directly into our anxieties and creates a sense of urgency that's pretty hard to ignore. So when you put all of this together, you can see that headline writers have this whole arsenal of tools they can use. They pull in celebrity names for that instant recognition, they jump on trending topics, they use really charged emotional language to get a reaction. Even something as simple as keeping it short or using parentheses can make a headline pop. And this brings us right back to that Perez Hilton headline. It is a perfect storm of these techniques. You've got the massive celebrity name, you've got the highly emotional words like bitch and heated, and it creates a huge information gap. We're just left wondering what on earth happened, and we feel that compulsion to find out. It is a textbook example of all these principles in action. But listen, these techniques are not just for celebrity gossip, not by a long shot. They're used in the world of high-stakes politics all the time. Just take a look at this analysis from The Guardian. It's looking at an incident where a private message between world leaders was made public. And the argument here is that this wasn't just some accidental leak, this was a calculated move. It was a deliberate strategy, using mass communication as a weapon to destabilize a rival, to hurt and intimidate them.
And the long-term risk of a tactic like this is pretty significant. I mean, if leaders can't have private conversations without worrying they'll be weaponized in public, they might just stop having frank conversations at all.
And it's not just the powerful people using these tools anymore. In online communities like Reddit, that line between who consumes the news and who creates it is getting really blurry. As this user points out, their little corner of the internet has become a source for actual gossip, so much so that PR agencies are now actively showing up trying to influence the conversation. In a way, we've all become part of the information machine.
So, we've seen how headlines are built to grab our attention, and we've seen how communication itself can be used as a strategic weapon. Now, for this last section, let's put it all together. Let's apply this new lens to a major geopolitical story. We're going to look at the high-stakes chess match between the US and China and see how these principles we've been talking about might be playing out on a global scale.
According to one geopolitical analyst, the main long-term strategic goal for the US is to counter China's rising influence. And from this perspective, the key is to find a critical weakness. For a manufacturing powerhouse like China, that vulnerability is its massive dependence on imported oil. So if you follow this analysis, the US strategy becomes all about controlling global oil sources and supply lines.
Now, according to this analyst, the first big move in this strategy was focused on Venezuela. Why Venezuela? Simple. It's sitting on the largest proven oil reserves in the entire world. The analyst argues that the U.S. approach wasn't a direct invasion, but more of a tactical, non-military effort to encourage a regime change and pull the country into the U.S. sphere of influence. The ultimate goal from this viewpoint was to secure both the oil and Venezuela's huge gold reserves, which would weaken China's access to both.
And this is not a strategy that plays out over a few weeks or months. The analyst really emphasizes that the U.S. often plays a very, very long game. They point to historical examples like the 46-year Cold War to take down the Soviet Union, or a 53-year strategic wait to reverse the situation in Bangladesh. From this viewpoint, all the recent talk about Greenland isn't just random. It's the next move in a game that spans generations.
And when you look at the Greenland situation through this particular lens, the power dynamics get really clear. The analyst points out that the U.S. is using a multi-pronged strategy, offering to buy the island, threatening tariffs, pushing for a referendum. Meanwhile, the European response is described as largely symbolic and weak. Sending a handful of soldiers in this view does very little to counter that kind of strategic push from the U.S.
So the analyst's prediction here is that the U.S. will eventually acquire Greenland, but not through an invasion. Instead, they believe it'll happen through a referendum, a kind of peaceful acquisition made possible by shared cultural ties, which makes it a much easier political move than a military intervention somewhere else.
And that brings us full circle. We started with this chaotic flood of headlines: business, politics, pop culture. Then we dug into the psychological toolkit that makes those headlines so powerful. And now, we've seen how those very same principles of communication and strategy might be at play in a massive global chess game. So the question is, the next time you see a headline about Greenland, or a crisis in Venezuela, or a bold statement from a world leader, ask yourself, what's the story behind the story? How does knowing all this change the way you see the news?
World Talk Brief. News explained without the noise. Subscribe for more clear, thoughtful explanations.